Buckle up, folks, because this deep dive is going to be a wild one. We're tackling some seriously out there ideas about predicting the future.
Oh, yeah.
Our source material today, a transcript from Clif High himself. You know, the guy who analyzes tons of online text to try and see what's coming next.
I've heard of him.
He calls it psychic leaking.
Psychic leaking.
Yeah, basically saying humanity's unconsciously spilling the beans about the future through the words we use.
Huh. That's a new one.
It really makes you think, doesn't it? But okay, before we go full-on woo-woo, let's break down what Clif High actually does.
Lay it on me.
So he takes these huge data sets of online text, right? Think like forums, blogs, news articles, the whole shebang. Not social media, though. That's too noisy for him.
Interesting.
And he's looking for these subtle shifts in language. Like, are certain words popping up more? Are there anxieties or hopes kind of bubbling under the surface?
So like the collective mood swings of the internet.
Exactly. And he claims those shifts reveal our, like, subconscious expectations about what's going to happen.
I see. So we're all kind of whispering the future without even realizing it.
Right. And get this. He's made some pretty bold claims about stuff he says he predicted this way. Like the 2008 financial crash, even the Costa Concordia sinking.
Whoa, hold on. Now, to be fair, this transcript we're looking at doesn't exactly give us hard proof for any of that.
True.
And I gotta ask, are these linguistic shifts really psychic, or could they just be, reflections of what's already going on in society, like trends and anxieties that any good analyst could pick up on?
You're totally right. Got to keep that skepticism hat on, especially with predictions. The future's a slippery fish, you know?
Absolutely. No matter how fancy your model is, prediction's always a game of maybe, not definitely.
Speaking of different ways to see the future, High actually contrasts his method, all this data crunching, with what he calls experiential forecasting.
Okay.
He specifically mentions this guy, Dick Ulgar, and his group, who are all about remote viewing.
Oh, interesting.
Now, that's a whole other can of worms, right? Experiencing the future firsthand instead of just analyzing numbers.
Mind-blowing stuff, if you really think about it.
Totally. Remote viewing's been around for a while, people claiming they can perceive events or places far away, even across time. It's fascinating, but yeah, definitely still pretty controversial in mainstream science. It's a rabbit hole we could set a whole other deep dive on for sure.
Agreed.
But what gets me is the contrast, right? On one hand, you've got High, all data-driven with his language analysis.
Right.
And then you've got this idea of tapping into some kind of like universal consciousness or precognitive ability to actually live the future before it happens.
Two very different approaches, but both hinge on the idea that info about the future is out there somehow. We just got to figure out how to access it.
Makes you question everything we think we know about time and information, huh?
Absolutely. It suggests there might be more to reality than meets the eye, more ways of knowing than we currently realize.
So we've got psychic leaking, remote viewing. Feel like we're already pretty far down the rabbit hole here.
Aha, you said it.
But, oh, it gets weirder, trust me. The transcript mentions this story where High was offered a huge chunk of change to sell his code, like big money.
Oh, wow. Who was buying?
Apparently some Israeli firm. But High claims he turned them down flat.
Really? Why?
Because, and I quote, he believed they were incapable of understanding it due to their language and cultural background. Whoa. Right.
That's quite the statement.
It is.
Got to remember, this is High's claim, not necessarily objective fact, but it does bring up some interesting questions about how language and thought are connected, doesn't it?
Totally. Like, can certain languages or even ways of thinking limit what we're able to understand?
That's the big question, isn't it? Can the language you speak actually box you in, make it harder to grasp certain ideas?
He even brings up this example, saying Hebrew has a way smaller vocabulary compared to ancient Greek.
I'm not sure I buy that argument entirely. But it does make you wonder if different languages highlight different parts of reality. Like maybe they shape how we see and understand the world.
Right. Maybe it's not that this firm was incapable, but that their whole approach, their thinking, was shaped by their language and culture in a way that just clashed with High's system.
Makes sense. Different languages have different structures, different ways of expressing things, different words for different ideas. Those differences could definitely affect how people approach problems, analyze data, even how they interpret abstract concepts.
It makes you wonder, are there hidden biases baked into any system of analysis, even High's, just because of the language and culture it came from?
Now, that's a thought-provoking question. It really speaks to the importance of having diverse viewpoints, of challenging our own assumptions, especially when we're dealing with complex ideas and interpretations.
But hold on, let's not get too lost down that rabbit hole just yet. We've got a whole other linguistic puzzle to untangle here. Clif High goes deep on this fascinating link between the word Elohim and the word hell.
Elohim and hell. Now that's an unexpected pairing.
It all hinges on how the ancient Greeks pronounced things. Apparently, they had this thing where they'd add an aspirated H sound to words that started with vowels. So to them, Elohim would have sounded more like Elohim. Crazy, right?
Whoa, that's a wild linguistic connection. Of course, the history and theology behind both Elohim and the concept of hell are super complicated, not just some pronunciation quirk. But it is a really cool example of how language evolved, how those changes can change how we understand big, important ideas.
Right. Makes you wonder what other hidden connections are buried in the words we use every day, and how they might be shaping our view of the world without us even knowing it.
It really highlights the power of language, not just to communicate, but to shape our thoughts, beliefs, even how we experience reality itself.
Okay, so far we've got psychic leaking, remote viewing, the idea that language can literally shape how we think, and this unexpected connection between Elohim and hell.
We've covered some ground.
What are your initial thoughts on all this?
It's a fascinating mix, data analysis, linguistic speculation, and yeah, maybe even a dash of the mystical thrown in there. It definitely pushes us to rethink how we see the future and the role language might play in shaping it.
Couldn't have put it better myself.
Back for more deep diving. Are you ready to see what Clif High's predictions actually are?
Oh, absolutely. Things get pretty interesting, to say the least, when he starts talking about what he thinks is going to happen. Remember that prediction about retribution for all those QAnon and Nesra Gesera folks?
Oh yeah, those folks pushing those big financial reset theories. No, I can see why someone might predict a backlash. Those scams can really hurt people.
No kidding. High doesn't hold back either. It claims there's going to be a reckoning for spreading that misinformation.
Strong words.
Yeah, but before we get too deep into that, there's this other prediction that really caught my eye. He keeps hinting at this like emerging sci-fi world and all these new opportunities for humanity. Super perfect, but it definitely got me thinking.
Cryptic, sure, but maybe not so surprising given how fast technology is changing everything these days, right?
It's true.
Artificial intelligence, biotechnologies, space exploration. I mean, it's all moving at warp speed. The line between science fiction and reality is getting blurrier by the day.
It really is. Like we're living in this constant state of disruption, which honestly can be both exciting and kind of terrifying at the same time.
Absolutely.
Think about it. We're on the verge of breakthroughs that could totally change how we live. For better or worse, who knows?
The potential is huge, that's for sure. We could solve some of humanity's biggest problems: disease, poverty, climate change. But there's always the flip side, right?
Oh, you're going to make me nervous.
Unintended consequences, ethical dilemmas, even the chance that these technologies could just make existing inequalities worse or create totally new ones.
It's a double-edged sword for sure. And that's where it gets even wilder. In the middle of all this talk about rapid technological change, societal upheaval, High drops this bombshell. Shit canning the whole Jew-D dystopia thing. Like, what does that even mean?
Okay, that's some loaded language for sure. Sounds like he's suggesting a shift away from what he sees as a negative controlling force, maybe playing into some of those conspiracy theories about global elites. We got to tread carefully here, though.
Of course, not here to endorse any conspiracy theories.
Right. Our job is to explore the ideas in the source material, even the ones that might make us uncomfortable. But it's worth noting, High's language, even though it's provocative, could also be interpreted as wanting positive change, like breaking free from systems he sees as oppressive.
That's a fair point. It ties into this whole sci-fi world thing, right? Like, there's this potential for radical transformation, a clean break from how things are now.
Yeah, I see that.
And speaking of sweeping away the old, he also goes after Netflix, calls for someone to buy it and get rid of all that dystopian propaganda, Elohim worship cult horse shit. Again, not exactly mincing words.
Whoa. He definitely sees a connection between media, entertainment, and how we're being fed what he considers negative or manipulative narratives. Whether you agree with him or not, it does make you think about how much media shapes our view of the world and what we expect from the future.
It really does. It's like, what if the stories we consume, the narratives we buy into, are actually shaping the reality we experience? It's almost like that psychic leaking idea coming full circle.
How so?
Maybe we're not just passively predicting the future, but actively creating it through the stories we tell ourselves.
That's a pretty powerful thought. And it highlights how important media literacy is, being able to think critically, being aware of all the messages we're bombarded with every day.
Absolute. But okay, back to Clif High's predictions. There's this whole other layer to this sci-fi world thing that I find super intriguing. He seems to think that once humanity breaks free from all these perceived constraints, we'll finally be ready to face, wait for it, space aliens.
You mean like the Elohim?
Bingo. He keeps coming back to them, suggesting they're the real puppet masters, pulling humanity's strings for their own agenda. But here's the twist. He doesn't think it's a bad thing.
Interesting.
He actually believes this new sci-fi world will make humanity ready to interact with these extraterrestrial beings as equals. Talks about adults being in charge, understanding the nature of contact. It's a wild mix of conspiracy theory and almost like utopian optimism.
It is a curious blend. Even if you're not buying into the whole alien overlord thing, it taps into that very human fascination with the unknown, the possibility of other intelligent life out there in the universe.
Totally. Like, he's suggesting humanity's about to take this massive evolutionary leap, one that lets us connect with other intelligent beings on a whole new level. Maybe that's what this sci-fi world is all about, a world where we've transcended our limitations and stepped into this new era of understanding and possibility.
It's a pretty compelling vision, even if the details are, well, debatable. It speaks to our desire to explore, to connect, to push the boundaries of what we think is possible.
Absolutely. But, I got to circle back to that point about language and cultural differences for a second. Remember how High said that Israeli firm couldn't understand his code because of their background?
Oh,
It
yeah.
felt a bit, I don't know, essentialist, maybe?
Yeah, it's really important to avoid making sweeping generalizations about entire cultures or linguistic groups. Language and culture are incredibly complex. To reduce them to stereotypes is not only inaccurate, it can be harmful.
You're right, you're right. But it does make you think about how language shapes our worldview, doesn't it?
It really does.
Even if it's not about one language being better than another, there's something to be said for how different languages might emphasize different ways of thinking or seeing the world.
Totally. Like we discussed earlier, linguistic relativity suggests that the language we speak can actually influence how we think and categorize things. Different languages have different grammars, different vocabularies, different ways of expressing ideas, and those differences can shape how we understand time, space, relationships, even our own sense of self.
So maybe this Israeli firm wasn't incapable, just approaching things from a completely different angle because of their language and culture, an angle that just didn't mesh with High's system.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that different ways of thinking, different perspectives can be incredibly valuable even when they lead to disagreements or misunderstandings.
Okay, I'm feeling a bit more grounded about that whole thing now. But let's get back to this sci-fi world idea. What are some real-world trends that might be feeding into this sense of a future that feels both exciting and uncertain?
Well, think about the things we've already talked about: AI, biotechnology, space exploration, virtual reality. These are fields that are changing at an incredible pace. We're on the edge of breakthroughs that could completely transform our lives, but we don't know if it'll be for better or worse. Take AI, for instance. It's leading to amazing advances in medicine and manufacturing, but it's also raising concerns about job displacement and the ethical implications of these increasingly autonomous systems.
Exactly. It's like we're caught in this constant whirlwind of disruption. On one hand, we have the potential to solve some of humanity's biggest problems. But then there's the fear of unintended consequences, the potential for these technologies to be used for harm.
The double-edged sword of progress, as they say. It all comes down to us, as a society, to make sure these advancements are guided by ethical principles, inclusivity, and a genuine concern for the well-being of all of humanity. It's a tall order, but I believe we can do it.
I'm with you on that. And maybe that's where Clif High's predictions, as out there as they might seem, offer a useful perspective. They push us to think critically about what's shaping the future, to have open and honest conversations about the implications of these emerging technologies, and to actually participate in creating a future that aligns with our values.
Well said. At the end of the day, the future isn't something that just happens to us. It's something we actively participate in creating.
That's such a powerful reminder, and it leads us to the big question. How do we navigate this emerging sci-fi world in a way that benefits everyone? What choices will we make? What stories will we tell? And how will those stories shape the reality we experience?
That's a question worth pondering, for sure. Maybe our listener has some thoughts on that.
And we're back for the final leg of our deep dive into Clif High's predictions. We've covered some serious ground, from psychic leaking to remote viewing, from ancient Greek pronunciations to, well, space aliens.
We have, and we've touched on some really thought-provoking questions about language, how it shapes our thoughts, and how we all play a role in creating the future we want to see.
Exactly. And as we wrap up this whole exploration of Clif High's ideas in this sci-fi world he keeps talking about, I find myself circling back to this idea of language as like a tool to shape reality, almost like he's saying we're not just predicting the future, but actively creating it through the words we use and the stories we tell.
It's a powerful thought, no doubt. Like, language isn't just about communication. It's a force that can change how we think, what we believe, even the world around us.
It really makes you stop and think about how much weight our words carry, right? Individually, but also collectively. Like, if we're constantly surrounded by these narratives of doom and gloom, is that what we're setting ourselves up for?
It's a good question to ask ourselves, isn't it? What kind of language do we use when we talk about the future? Are we focused on the worst case scenarios, or are we actively trying to imagine and actually say what a better future could look like? One that's more just, equitable, and sustainable.
And it's not just the words themselves, it's the whole story we build around them, right? Are we focusing on stories of human resilience, ingenuity, and collaboration? Or are we defaulting to stories of scarcity, competition, and division?
Absolutely. The stories we tell, both to ourselves and each other, have a huge impact on what we believe, how we act, and ultimately the kind of world we end up creating.
So when it comes to this whole sci-fi world that's emerging, what kind of story do we want to tell? Should we be focusing on the incredible potential of tech to solve problems? Or should we be dwelling on how those same advances could make inequality worse?
I don't think it's about ignoring the risks and challenges, not at all. It's about how we approach the future with a sense of agency, of possibility, not just fear and resignation.
I agree. We need to remember that the future isn't set in stone. It's not some fixed destiny. It's more like, I don't know, a blank canvas, a story waiting to be written. And the choices we make, the words we use, the actions we take, those are the brushstrokes that will paint that picture, write that story.
Beautifully put. It's about realizing we have the power to shape the world around us, not through wishful thinking or some magical pronouncements, but through conscious choices, thoughtful actions, and yes, even the language we use to describe the future we want.
It's a call to be mindful, to be intentional, to really understand that the future isn't just something that happens to us. We create it together.
And as the world gets more complex, more interconnected, it's even more important to have these open and honest conversations, to challenge our own assumptions, and to truly value different perspectives.
Because at the end of the day, the future belongs to all of us. The stories we tell, the words we choose, the actions we take, that's the legacy we leave behind. So as we wrap up this deep dive, we leave you with this question. What story are your words telling about the future?
What kind of future are you creating through your thoughts, your words, your actions?
Think about it, explore it, and most importantly, live it. Until next time, folks, keep diving deep.